I didn't find out my wife was cheating because I caught her in bed with someone. I found out because the old man next door knocked on my door one Tuesday evening, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "Son, I think you need to know what's been happening in your house when you're not home." For a second, I honestly thought he was joking. Or confused. Mr. Callahan was in his late 60s, retired, always outside trimming hedges or washing the same truck that was already spotless. He was the kind of neighbor who noticed everything, but he wasn't a gossip. He mostly kept to himself unless it was important. I laughed at first. Not because it was funny, but because my brain rejected it immediately. My wife, Emily, and I had been married for 6 years. We had a routine, a nice house in a quiet suburb, 2 decent jobs, and the kind of life that looked solid from the outside. I worked long hours in logistics and usually got home around 7. Emily worked part-time from home doing bookkeeping for a small dental office. She always said she liked the flexibility because it gave her peace, more time for herself, more time to build a life instead of just surviving one. That was her phrase. I remember it because I used to admire it. She was warm when she wanted to be, affectionate when I was exhausted, and smart enough to make every problem sound manageable. If we had arguments, they were normal married people arguments. Money. Time. Me being too distracted. Her feeling lonely. Nothing dramatic enough to make me think my entire life was a lie. So when Mr. Callahan said that, I just stared at him and told him there had to be some mistake. He didn't argue. He just nodded slowly and said, "I hoped there was." That's why I waited before saying anything. Then he told me to come over to his porch. I followed him across the lawn in a kind of numb autopilot. My heart wasn't racing yet. Not really. I was still in that stupid stage where I thought there had to be a reasonable explanation for whatever he'd seen. He sat down, motioned for me to do the same, and folded his hands over his stomach like a man preparing to deliver bad news he had no interest in delivering. "I'm home most days," he said. "I sit right here. Read, drink coffee, watch the street. I notice who comes and goes. About 2 months ago, I saw a man I didn't recognize pull into your driveway around noon. Thought maybe he was with the cable company or a contractor. But he didn't have a uniform. He was carrying flowers. That made something shift in my chest. I still didn't say anything. He stayed for a little over an hour," Mr. Callahan continued. "Then he left. A week later, a different man showed up. Then another one after that. Different cars. Different times. Same pattern. Middle of the day, when you're at work." I remember gripping the arm of the porch chair so hard my hand hurt. "Are you sure Emily wasn't just having friends over?" I asked, and even to my own ears I sounded pathetic. He looked at me with the kind of pity that strips your dignity away faster than anger ever could. "I've been married before," he said quietly. "And I may be old, but I'm not blind." Then he stood up, disappeared into his house, and came back with a small notepad. On it were dates. Approximate times. Descriptions of vehicles. One red SUV. A black BMW. A white pickup with tinted windows. He had written license plate numbers on 2 of them because, in his words, something about it didn't sit right with me. I felt cold all over. He handed me the pad and said, I didn't want to be the man who meddled in another marriage. But I also couldn't keep watching this and say nothing. "You seem like a decent man. Decent men deserve the truth." I thanked him, though I barely remember saying it. Then I walked back into my house like it belonged to strangers. Emily was in the kitchen making pasta, humming to herself like it was any other evening. She turned when I came in and smiled. That same soft smile. That same familiar face I had kissed goodbye that morning. "Hey, you're late," she said. "Long day." I looked at her and wondered how many times she had stood in that exact kitchen after another man left through the front door. I wanted to confront her right there. I wanted to slam the notepad onto the counter and watch her explain her way out of it. But something stopped me. Maybe pride. Maybe survival. Maybe the instinctive understanding that once you show your cards to a liar, they just get better at lying. So I forced myself to act normal. I kissed her cheek. I sat down. I asked about her day. She told me some story about a client messing up invoices, and I nodded like I was listening, while every word out of her mouth sounded fake. I watched her serve dinner with those calm hands and felt like I was sitting across from someone wearing my wife's face. That night, after she fell asleep, I lay awake and stared at the ceiling. At 2:13 in the morning, I quietly got out of bed, took her phone off the charger, and went into the bathroom. I knew her passcode. It was still the same 4 digits she'd had for years. That alone almost made me laugh. Either she thought I'd never check, or she had grown so confident she didn't care anymore. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. At first glance, nothing seemed obvious. No suspicious names. No explicit messages. But then I opened her deleted texts. That was when the floor dropped out from under me. There were dozens. Some were flirtatious. Some were graphic. Some were logistical, which somehow made them worse. Times. Addresses. He'll be gone until 6:30. Use the side door. Don't park directly in front. One thread was saved under a woman's name, but the messages made it very clear it was a man. Another contact had no name at all, just a number, but there were pictures. Not enough to confuse what I was looking at. I sat on the bathroom floor and read until the room blurred. It wasn't one affair. It wasn't even two. It was a pattern. A revolving door. Months of it, maybe longer. Some of the messages went back nearly a year. Men I'd never heard of. Men who knew she was married. Men who joked about my work schedule like it was part of their convenience. One text from 3 weeks earlier nearly made me throw up. He suspects nothing. He's too trusting. I must have read that line 20 times. Too trusting. Not loving. Not hardworking. Not loyal. Just stupid enough to be easy. I don't know how long I stayed in there before I heard movement in the bedroom and shoved the phone back where it belonged. I washed my face, looked in the mirror, and barely recognized the man staring back at me. The worst part wasn't even the cheating yet. It was the instant replay in my mind. Every business trip she kissed me goodbye for. Every time she complained I wasn't emotionally available. Every time she asked why I seemed distant lately. Every fake argument she used to justify her coldness. Every moment I blamed myself for a marriage she was already destroying behind my back. When I got back into bed, Emily rolled over, wrapped an arm around me, and mumbled, "You okay?" I stared into the darkness and said the only thing I could trust myself to say. "Yeah. Just tired." But I wasn't tired. I was awake in a way I had never been in my life. And by morning, I wasn't just heartbroken. I was paying attention. The next morning, I acted exactly the same as always. That was the hardest part. Emily made coffee. I sat at the table scrolling through my phone like I normally did before work. She asked if I could pick up groceries on the way home later. I said sure. She kissed me on the cheek before I left, the same way she had done thousands of times before. But now every small detail felt different. I noticed how relaxed she looked once she thought I was gone. Instead of driving straight to work like usual, I parked my car 2 streets away and walked back through the neighborhood. My heart was pounding in my ears the entire time. I kept telling myself maybe yesterday was some kind of misunderstanding. Maybe those messages meant something else. Maybe I was overreacting. But deep down I already knew the truth. I moved quietly along the sidewalk until I could see our house from behind a large oak tree across the street. From there I had a clear view of the driveway and the front door. At first, nothing happened. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. I started to feel ridiculous standing there like some paranoid stranger watching his own house. And then a black BMW slowly turned onto our street. My stomach dropped instantly. The car slowed down as it approached our driveway. It didn't hesitate. It pulled in like the driver had done it many times before. A tall guy stepped out. Mid-30s maybe. Well-dressed. He walked straight up to the front door and knocked once. The door opened almost immediately. Emily stood there. Even from across the street I could see her smile. Not the polite smile she gave neighbors. The other one. The one I thought was only for me. She looked around quickly before letting him inside. The door closed. And just like that, my marriage ended. I stood there for a long time after that, staring at the house that suddenly didn't feel like my home anymore. Something strange happened in that moment. I expected to feel rage. Or maybe heartbreak. But instead, everything went quiet inside my head. Like a switch had flipped. The doubt was gone. The confusion was gone. Now there was only clarity. Mr. Callahan hadn't exaggerated anything. If anything, he had spared me the worst of it. I looked down at my phone and opened the camera. I zoomed in and took a few photos of the BMW in my driveway. Then I took a short video, just in case. I didn't know yet what I was going to do with the evidence. But I knew I would need it. After about 40 minutes, the front door opened again. The guy walked out first, adjusting his jacket. Emily followed him to the door, laughing at something he said. She touched his arm before he left. A gesture so casual it almost hurt more than anything else. He got back into the BMW and drove away. Emily watched from the doorway until the car disappeared around the corner. Then she closed the door. I stood there behind that tree, feeling like I had just watched a stranger live inside my life. For a few seconds I thought about walking up to the house and confronting her right then. Kicking the door open. Asking her how long she thought she could keep humiliating me like this. But something stopped me again. Because the truth was, this wasn't just cheating. This was a system. Different men. Different days. Carefully planned. And if I rushed in angry, she would do what liars always do. Deny. Manipulate. Turn it back on me. No. If I was going to end this, I was going to do it the right way. Calm. Prepared. And on my terms. So instead of going home, I walked back to my car and sat there for a while thinking. About the messages. About the men. About the way she had laughed while another man walked out of our house. And slowly, an idea started forming in my head. If Emily thought I was too trusting, then maybe I should let her keep thinking that. Just a little longer. For the next few days, I played the same role I always had. The trusting husband. The man who worked long hours and came home tired. The man who believed every word his wife said without question. The man who had no idea what was happening in his own house. Emily didn't suspect anything. She kissed me goodbye in the mornings. She sent me random texts during the day. Sometimes she even complained about being bored at home. Every message made my stomach turn. But I kept answering like everything was normal. Because while she thought she was fooling me, I was quietly putting the pieces together. The first thing I did was talk to Mr. Callahan again. I thanked him properly this time. Not the quick, shocked thank you I gave him the first night, but a real one. I told him he had done the right thing. He just nodded and said something that stuck with me. Truth hurts, son. But living in a lie hurts longer. Over the next week he helped me more than he probably realized. He had already been paying attention before I even knew something was wrong. From his porch he could see most of the street, including my driveway. Whenever a car pulled up to my house during the day, he wrote it down. Different vehicles. Different men. Exactly like he had said. Meanwhile, I started gathering my own proof. I checked our home security system logs. The front camera had been turned off months ago. At the time Emily told me it was glitching and she disabled it until we could replace it. Now I knew why. So I quietly ordered a small indoor camera online and placed it in the living room, hidden between books on a shelf that faced the front door. I told myself I was doing it for evidence. But the first time I checked the footage, it still felt like someone punched me in the chest. 2 days after installing it, a man walked through my front door at 1:12 p.m. He didn't knock. Emily opened the door before he even reached it. They hugged like they had done it many times before. I turned the video off after that. I didn't need to see more. But I saved the file. Then another video. And another. Within a week I had proof of 3 different men walking into my house while I was at work. Each time Emily greeted them like she had been waiting all day. At night, she slept next to me like nothing was wrong. Sometimes she would even ask if everything was okay because I seemed quiet lately. That part almost made me laugh. Because while she thought I was drifting away emotionally, I was actually preparing for the moment that would end everything. I spoke to a lawyer. I didn't tell Emily. I didn't tell anyone except the man sitting across the desk from me while I slid my phone across the table and showed him the videos. He watched quietly. Then he leaned back in his chair and said, "Well, you definitely won't have a problem explaining why the marriage ended." We talked for nearly an hour. About the house. About finances. About how divorce actually works when one partner has been lying for this long. When I left his office, something strange happened again. For the first time since Mr. Callahan knocked on my door. I felt calm. Not because things were better. But because now I had a plan. Emily thought she was living two lives. What she didn't know was that both of them were about to collide. And when they did, everyone was going to see the truth. 2 weeks after I first spoke to the lawyer, everything was ready. The papers were prepared. The evidence was backed up in 3 different places. Every video, every screenshot, every message I had recovered from her phone. I didn't feel angry anymore. Just, finished. That Friday evening, Emily texted me around 4 in the afternoon. Working late again tonight? I stared at the message for a moment before replying. Yeah. Probably home around 8. A few seconds later she answered with a simple heart emoji. By then I already knew what that meant. Mr. Callahan texted me about an hour later. Black pickup truck just pulled into your driveway. I thanked him and grabbed my keys. When I pulled onto our street 15 minutes later, the truck was still there. Parked right in front of my house. I sat in the car for a moment, looking at the place that used to feel like home. The same porch. The same windows. The same front door I had walked through every day for years. Except now I knew what had really been happening behind it. I walked up to the door and unlocked it quietly. Inside, I could hear laughter coming from the living room. A man's voice. Emily's voice. I stepped inside and turned the corner. They both froze. Emily was sitting on the couch, far too close to a man I had never seen before. His arm was draped casually over the back of the sofa behind her. For a few seconds no one said anything. Emily's face went pale. What are you doing home?" she stammered. I looked at both of them calmly. Working late didn't work out. The guy stood up quickly, clearly uncomfortable. "Man, I didn't know she was married," he said immediately, putting his hands up like he wanted nothing to do with the situation. I almost laughed. "Oh, she told you," I said. Both of them stared at me. Then I pulled my phone out and set it on the coffee table. On the screen was a paused video from the hidden camera. One of many. Emily's eyes widened. You were spying on me," she said, her voice shaking. "No," I replied quietly. I was confirming what I already knew. I picked up an envelope from the table and slid it toward her. "Those are divorce papers." Her hand started trembling as she stared at it. "This isn't what you think," she said quickly. But we both knew that was a lie. It had always been a lie. I spoke to a lawyer, I continued calmly. The house was purchased before we got married. The evidence of your affairs is documented. Everything is already filed. The man next to her slowly backed toward the door. "I'm gonna leave," he muttered. Neither of us stopped him. When the door closed, the room went silent. Emily looked at me like she was seeing a stranger. Maybe she was. "Why didn't you just talk to me?" she whispered. That question almost made me smile. "Because," I said, "you stopped telling the truth a long time ago." I turned toward the door and paused for a moment. "Your things will be packed this weekend." Then I walked out of the house. Mr. Callahan was sitting on his porch across the street, just like always. When he saw me, he raised his coffee cup slightly. I nodded back. For the first time in weeks, the air felt lighter. Not because the pain was gone. But because the lie was. And sometimes, the truth is the only way to finally be free. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. I post new Reddit stories about cheating, relationships, and crazy life situations every day. And if you have a story like this, feel free to share it in the comments.